Hello, I'm Chris Bosmans. I work as a policy analyst for the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And I will pre-record a presentation on financing SMEs and entrepreneurship and OECD scoreboards. Special edition will focus on the impact of COVID-19. This recording is for the 58th session of the Working Party on SMEs and Entrepreneurship. So without further ado, I would like to move to the contents of the presentation of this forthcoming publication. So the first topic I would like to share some insights is on the situation on SME and entrepreneurship access to finance in the run-up to the COVID-19 crisis, which is largely based on data received from scoreboard experts from 2019. I only have the time to just focus on a few key messages I would like to share. So the first message is that by and large, SME finance conditions were favorable in 2019. So for example, interest rates for SMEs declined in 22 out of 39 countries for which we have comparable data, and are typically at a very low level in historical context. Also, survey data illustrates that credit standards are quite loose in 2019. There are quite few SMEs that consider access to finance as a major problem in that year. Also, non-performing loans for SMEs were relatively low in 2019 in the run-up to the crisis. Despite this broadly positive picture, we observe that lending to SMEs remained quite weak in 2019. For example, new lending flows are often negative in quite a few countries, as a chart depicted on this slide illustrates. This picture contrasts quite a bit with the uptake by SMEs of other sources of finance other than straight bank debt, where generally speaking, non-bank financing instruments continued to expand in 2019, in line with observations in 2017 and 2018. For example, leasing, hire purchase, and factoring activities all increased in 2019, often by double digits growth rates. Also, we are waiting for more comprehensive data on online alternative finance, crowdfunding, and peer-to-peer lending mainly. But the indications we have so far is that this market has also expanded quite a bit in 2019. Venture capital investments, that's another example. We see that investments of venture capital expanded in a clear majority of countries for which we have data, and often by quite a bit, as you can also tell from the charts depicted on this slide. So overall, the access to finance in 2019, before the crisis hit, was broadly favorable, not considered as problematic for majority of SMEs, for majority of countries for which we have data, with the caveat that the picture is different from one country to the next. I would like to expand on the impact of COVID-19 on SME access to finance. And well, the main idea is that SMEs were very severely affected by the crisis, as illustrated by more than 80 surveys across the globe. These surveys indicate quite clearly that in the absence of government intervention, a lot of SMEs are at risk of shutting down within 3 months. And that is because of various reasons. One is that SMEs are typically more fragile than the larger counterparts. They have smaller cash buffers in general. They also have less bargaining power to enforce attractive payment conditions and have weaker supply chain capabilities. Small enterprises are generally overrepresented in the sectors most affected by the crisis, such as hospitality or tourism. It's easier for large firms to tap into different sources of finance, notwithstanding the trends of diversification of finance instruments by SMEs, especially market-based instruments, are typically used more often by large firms than by smaller ones, which are more dependent on bank loans and internal source of finance. And then finally, a lot of established small companies may lack financial skills and capabilities, and also digital capabilities to adapt to the new situation. And well, the main impact of the crisis was really on SME liquidity. That's liquidity is the key word in this aspect. SME revenues have often been hit hard by containment measures and lower demand for goods and services. And in the short term, this decline in revenues cannot be compensated by lower operating expenses, which are often sticky. So simulations indicate that a 10% drop in revenues, and a lot of SMEs have experienced large declines in revenues as a consequence of the crisis. That can only be compensated by 6% on average in terms of operating expenses. So given the very limited cash reserves many small firms have, this means that there's a gap in the cash flow, in the liquidity, which needs to be covered by other instruments such as debt or by government support schemes. And the good news so far is that survey data indicate that lending to firms, to SMEs, has held up so far. Again, a bit of country variation. The general picture is that loans to SMEs have not suffered, at least not too much, in the first half of 2020. So for the Eurozone area, for example, survey data show that there has been an increase in demand for loans. Firms that want to shore up gaps caused by the decline in revenue. And at the same time, there has been no significant tightening of credit standards. In the United Kingdom, we observe a steep increase in demand for credit in Q2 2020. Another clear picture in terms of credit standards. And in North America, there's again been an increase for the demand for corporate loans and a slight increase, slight tightening in credit requirements, but not too dramatic, with a further expected increase in demand. Japan, for example, corporate lending is on the increase, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, again with no clear tightening in credit standards. So generally speaking, SMEs have been able to get bank loans during the crisis. And that is in large part due to the policy making of monetary and fiscal policy makers, which I will talk a bit in a few minutes. The picture is less clear cut when we talk about other sources of finance. There's especially a lot of worry about the impact on early stage equity finance. We observe a decline in seed and angel investments in China as well as the US, and an expected contraction in the Eurozone. So the main concern is that investors, such as business angels or venture capitalists, will focus on the current portfolio of investments, which often require follow-up investments, and that this will come at the detriment of investments into new ventures, especially at the very early stages of a firm's life cycle. In terms of equity finance, that has likely been strongly affected by the strong decline in both supply and demand of international trades, which also causes some concern. Leasing and hire purchases are also its access is expected to decline as loan delinquencies are likely to rise. Factors may be more hesitant to provide finance to new enterprises. We are waiting for more data and research on the online alternative finance market, but indication so far is that transactions from SMEs may decline, and that this may lead to more concentrated markets with weaker or smaller platforms and actors leaving the market. In terms of factoring, we see that in high-income countries, factoring volumes have declined more or less in line with turnover volumes. I would like to turn to the policy responses to the COVID-19 crisis. And first, a few words about monetary policy. According to data from the IMF, high-income countries, all of them, have loosened monetary policy making by conventional methods, mainly lowering interest rates to unprecedentedly low levels, and also by what they call non-standard or non-conventional policy measures. In low-income and mid-income countries, clear majority of countries have also loosened monetary policy, often very substantially. And in most countries, turning to fiscal measures, measures were sequenced in the following way. So when the crisis hits, the main emphasis in the immediate period afterwards was on health measures and providing the population with information. Then we see the second bullet of this slide that deferral schemes gained a lot of momentum, were quite popular. Deferral of tax payments, social contributions, and so on and so forth, which provides liquidity relief to impacted businesses. The third bullet is probably the most relevant in terms of this presentation. We see a lot of instruments that were beefed up or were established to support SME access to credit, which I will talk about in a minute. We also see, and that's the fourth bullet on the slides, that grants and wage subsidies similar measures gained a lot of momentum in the aftermath of the crisis. More recently, we see a gradual shift from crisis management and rescue policies to more structural measures in terms of digitalization, innovation, or internationalization, foster business dynamism, competitiveness, and resilience over the long term, which I will also discuss later in this presentation. So turning to SME finance instruments, there has been a huge increase in the number of loan guarantee schemes, with, for example, Denmark, Israel, and Japan establishing new guarantee schemes, boosting funding in quite a few other countries, other schemes where the government takes on more of the risk. We see, for example, more and more credit guarantee schemes where 100% of the risk is covered by the public sector, which was quite unusual before the crisis. Some countries have also made it easy to access existing loan guarantee schemes and made changes to the criteria to be eligible. So loan guarantees were very clearly key instruments as a response to the crisis. Another key instrument are direct loan support, where the picture is quite similar. A lot of countries have either established new schemes or provided more funding to existing programs. And the title of this presentation is that more diversification would be welcome, because a lot of the policy responses aimed to provide debt support, easy access to credit. We see some countries have, especially recently, beefed up equity support through public venture capital funds, convertible loans, and similar measures, and have also made grants and subsidies more available, with a lot of examples provided in the slides. But by and large, the financial instruments were really focused on that. Also, if you look at volumes that's of firms that were supported. Most of the support is concentrated on debt instruments. I would also like to highlight that support measures were not also only taken at the national level, but supranational organizations also play a crucial role in alleviating gaps in SME finance. I provide examples from the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Asian Development Bank, with some numbers. These are just examples. There are a lot of other organizations active in the area. As to wrap up this section of the presentation, I would like to focus on the key features and challenges of the policy response to ease access to finance for SMEs and entrepreneurs. Apologies. The main, I would say, key feature of the policy response in this area is that is the speed in which liquidity challenges had to be addressed, which required very simple procedures. So there was a need to reach a large population of firms in a very short period, and that required policymakers to attach very few conditions and made accessing the support as simple and fast as possible, which was especially relevant to reach new beneficiaries, firms that have not made use of government support previously, but were clearly in need of support right now. And that approach enabled a lot of firms to stay afloat, to get the funding that they urgently needed on time, but also creates a risk of misappropriation and misallocation of funds, not flowing to the right beneficiaries necessarily, which is quite a mounting concern for a lot of policymakers. Second key feature is that policies need to be very flexible and need to be refined to keep up with the evolving needs of its beneficiaries. There are a lot of examples where the uptake among certain target groups was deemed insufficient, requiring policymakers to refine the policies, to establish new ones, and to really make adjustments as time goes by, especially to tailor to the needs of specific groups which may otherwise find it hard to access support. For example, self-employed, micro-enterprises, or medium-sized firms. As a third key feature, I'd like to mention that private banks have often been key partners in the policy delivery, whereby public support actors leverage on existing networks and customer relationships from banks. And that again was quite crucial in getting the support out to a large group of small firms, but also comes at a risk to backslide on progress made in the diversification of SME finance instruments and sources. And then finally, there's an important role for financial innovation given the current crisis. For example, to simplify lending processes for underserved SMEs. So I would like now to turn to the policy issues in the next phases of the pandemic. The first point I would like to make is that liquidity relief measures really made an impact on the situation, allowed a lot of viable firms to stay in business, but at the same time may have some unintended consequences. The first concern is related to sustainability on public finances. So we observe that public debt is forecast to increase very substantially in high-income countries, quite a lot as well in emerging markets. Obviously not just because of SME support, but there is increasing worry that the current fiscal support measures may be unsustainable and may be revised as time goes by. It will prove crucial to combine a policy approach whereby support is kept at an adequate level as long as the economic climate is weak and SMEs that are viable risk going bankrupt, but at the same time to adopt a credible medium-term plan to stabilize public finances once the situation improves. That's the first point I would like to make. And then the second is that there's a clear need to strengthen economic and business dynamism. So while current support is often welcome for viable firms with liquidity issues to stay in business, it may also allow unviable firms to remain active because of the public support measures. Also the very loose monetary policy, which allows banks to evergreen existing loans to debt firms, and also in terms of changes to insolvency and bankruptcy procedures. So there is a risk that structurally unviable firms will remain in business for a very extended period of time because of these three policy decisions. And that may have long-term impact on business dynamism, may impede the process of creative destruction, which is especially relevant in current circumstances, given the very transformational nature of the crisis, with certain activities that may become obsolete, a lot of other activities that have a bright future because of the crisis. And then the final unintended consequence of the policy support so far is that it may turn the current liquidity crisis into a solvency crisis. So there is quite a worry that public policy support may increase the leverage ratio of its beneficiaries, and that it would pile up debt for firms that may already been over indebted going into the crisis. And for a lot of the beneficiaries of public support, also deferral schemes, will be hard to repay the debts and at the same time to keep investment levels at adequate levels. Just to talk a bit more about the impact of the crisis on bankruptcies and firm solvency. We see that so far, up to date, in the first half of 2020, bankruptcies have not increased dramatically, have sometimes decreased in a lot of countries. There is this expectation that bankruptcies will rise substantially in the second half of 2020 and in 2021, as for example showcased by this chart. And we think that policies that provide support to SMEs in need of finance, that at the same time do not increase the debt burden, that these policies are very valuable in the current period we are in, and that policymakers would be encouraged to explore avenues to provide support, which will still be needed, and at the same time not increase the leverage ratio. So in the full paper there is a description of instruments that can be used, which ranges from equity funds, convertible bonds, to convertible loans, various grant support measures. Some example of equity regulations have been loosened, or tax policies that encourage SME equity, for example, especially to allow retail investors to invest in small and medium-sized enterprises. And this may be a timely moment to think about out-of-the-box measures to provide support and at the same time not increase the leverage ratio of the beneficiaries, to explore these instruments more in depth. Also, this crisis offers an opportune moment to undertake more structural measures. So this current crisis period would be a good opportunity, for example, to implement improvements to insolvency procedures. As I just mentioned, there will likely be a sharp rise in insolvencies, and policies that would reduce the time and cost of firm failure would be very valuable. to make this process as well less painful than it may need to be. With some examples in a paper of countries that have taken this option. This crisis also very clearly shows the importance of SME digitalization. A lot of countries have strengthened policies to increase digital skills, expand access to digital infrastructure. As I mentioned, this crisis will be transformational, with some skills being in less demand and other skills quite necessary in the new labor market. It will be important for governments to focus efforts on reskilling, upskilling, and job matching, with examples from Australia, Singapore, and some other countries mentioned in the text. Quite a lot of countries have also increased public spending to allow demand for goods and services by SMEs to keep up. For example, Germany lowered its value-added tax. The crisis will also have a clear impact on the integration of SMEs into global value chains. Global value chains will likely become more regional, will be disrupted, and this will create challenges, but at the same time also opportunities for SMEs to find alternative markets, build networks, and diversify its supplier base. And governments may have a role to play in this area. So I would like to finish this presentation by saying that the Working Party on SMEs and Entrepreneurship will continue to support countries in recovery periods. And I would like to highlight some key publications from the Working Party. First, and the topic of this presentation is Financing SMEs and Entrepreneurs, an OECD scoreboard. The second flagship publication that may provide crucial guidance to policymakers in these times is the OECD SME and Entrepreneurship Outlook, which will have a focus as well on COVID-19. And the third publication of projects, I would say, is a Digital for SMEs Global Initiative. So I would like to thank you for your attention.